Hey guys, Adiutorium here, and in today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create the second puzzle mechanic idea, which is the push-pull mechanic. So the push-pull mechanic is basically just a more complex, fancy version of the simple object movement that we have discussed in the previous video. And if you forget how the push-pull mechanic looks like, it looks like this. So yeah, that's how the mechanic looks like. It is a really cool mechanic. It gives a lot more mechanical depth into moving an object instead of just interacting with an event and let the event move itself like in the simple object movement that we discussed in the previous video. But it does take a lot more effort to make. Before we start, I want you guys to know that I didn't create this push-pull mechanic. I actually learned it from a blog written by Hiddenone in rpgmakerweb.com titled Eventing a Push-Pull System. Shout out to Hiddenone for writing this blog. I will provide the link in the description below. Definitely check it out. The push-pull mechanic that I'm going to show you in this video is actually very similar to Hiddenone's grab and move event. The difference is that I did some tweak on the eventing because this version has a problem if you try to give sound effect when the player and the object moves. So if you're wondering how the problem looks like, it looks like this. So yeah, that's the problem. I don't think we want that on our game. So with everything clear on the way, let's get into the tutorial. Okay, so creating the push-pull mechanic requires quite a lot of eventing, and because of this, trying to create the mechanic in every single event of the movable object will be inefficient. It will just take more time, and if there is a problem, it will be harder to fix. And so to make it more efficient, we will be using common event to create the push-pull mechanic. This way, the event of the movable object will only have to call for that common event whenever the mechanic is being triggered. This will just save a lot of time and make things much easier for us. So the first step that we'll have to do is to create the common event for the push-pull mechanic. To create the common event, go to the database, common event, and here let's create a common event called push and pull. Of course, it can be any name that you want. For the trigger, we can just set it to none because this common event will be called from the movable objects event, so we don't have to set the trigger. Don't forget to click apply, and our push and pull common event is ready to be evented. Okay, now we will have to create a variable for this mechanic. This mechanic requires one variable, so let's make it. Go to event command, control variables, and let's make a variable called push and pull. Of course, it can be any names that you want. Now, this variable is very important because the value of this variable is the one that will determine whether the player is moving forward or backward. So it's very important. As for now, we don't have to do anything with it, so just click apply and then close the tab. Alright, so the first thing that we have to do here is to create a movement route for the player because we want the player's character to behave in a certain way when the mechanic is being triggered. To make this, go to the event commands, second page, set movement route. Make sure that the movement route is directed to the player, and here we'll want to turn the direction fix on because we want the player's character to face a fixed direction when pushing or pulling the movable object. And then after that, we will want to change the speed. Now, changing the speed is optional. You can just set the speed at normal, or you can make it slower or faster. It's up to you. For this tutorial, I'm going to make it slower. I'm going to set the speed to 3. And that's it. That's basically how the player's character will behave when the mechanic is being triggered. the character will have the direction fixed on, and the speed will be reduced to 3. Now we are going to make a loop after this, and a loop can be very taxing for your game's optimization, so we are going to give it some waiting time. Go to event command, second page, and here you see there is a wait button. Click it, and we'll give it a 3 frames waiting time. This way, the computer will have more time to process the loop. And after this, we'll make a loop. Now inside the loop, we will want to create a conditional branch. And in the conditional branch, go to for tab. The condition will be button OK is being pressed. So we'll make a conditional branch where it will set as true if the button OK is being pressed. And don't forget to create else branch. Click OK, and our conditional branch is there. And inside the else branch, we want to break a loop. It's on the first page. On the flow control segment, we will want to break loop. So this loop is actually the core of this mechanic. This loop is what allows the player to grab the movable object and push it or pull it continuously. That's why inside this loop there is a conditional branch where if button OK is being pressed, then the loop will continue. Which means if the player keep pressing the button OK or the spacebar, then the loop will continue. Hence the mechanic is still going on, and the player can push or pull the movable object continuously. But if the player stop pressing the button OK, then the loop will break, hence stopping the mechanic. Alright, now we have finished creating the base of the mechanic. Now it's time to build it up and create the details. Okay, so most of the eventing will be done inside the loop. The first thing that we will need to do is to check if the player is pushing the object, aka going forward, or pulling the object, aka going backward. And in order to know this, there are two things that we have to check. The first one is the player's character direction, and the second one is the move button that the player is pressing. If the player's character direction is the same as the move button that the player is pressing, that means the player is pushing the object or going forward. But if the player's character direction is opposite to the move button that the player is pressing, that means the player is pulling the object or going backwards. So for example, if the player's character direction is facing up and the player is pressing the button up, that means the player is going forward or push the object. But if the player's character is facing up and the player is pressing the button down, that means the player is going backwards or pulls the object. Okay, so first we will have to check if the player is pushing the object or going forward. To do that, we will have to make a conditional branch. So we go to event command, conditional branch, and for the first condition, we will check for the player's character direction. So we go to the third page, there is a character radio box here, click on it, and here we can check for the player's direction. For the first one, we will check if the player is facing down. Click OK, and we get our first condition. Now we need two conditions, so we can just copy this first condition and then paste it inside the first condition. So now we get a nested conditional branch. Now for the second condition, we will check for the button that the player is pressing. So go to the for page, and then here in the button radio box, click on it. We will check if the player is also pressing the button down. Click OK, and if both these conditions are true, then we know that the player is moving forward or is pushing the object. And to track this, we will use the variable that we have already made at the beginning of this video. So go to the event command, and then control variables, and here we'll change the value of the variable of push and pull, the variable that we made. Now, we'll change it to the value of 1. The value of 1 means that the player is pushing the object or going forward. Click OK, and this is basically how you check if the player is going forward in one direction or not. And all we have to do now is to do the same for all the other directions. So we can just copy this nested conditional branch, paste it down here, and now we change it if the player is facing left and if button left is being pressed. We do the same for right. If the player is facing right and the button right is being pressed, then the player is moving forward or pushing the button. And lastly, if the player is facing up and the button is also being pressed up, that means the player is going forward. And this is basically how you check if the player is going forward or pushing the object or not. Alright, now that we have finished checking if the player is pushing the object or not, we will move on to checking if the player is pulling the object or not. But since there will be a lot of conditional branch, it can get pretty confusing to read at this. So I suggest you put some comments to give mark to each segment of the mechanic. So maybe this part will give a comment like this: check if pushing. And then after this, at the end of the part where we check if the player is pushing the object or not, we will put the comment, check if pulling. This way it will be easier for you if you want to read this common event later on. Alright, since we have finished to create the part to check if the player is pushing the object or not, creating the part to check if the player is pulling the object or not should be a lot easier. That's because the only difference will be in the second condition. In check if pushing part, the pressed button should be on the same direction as the character's direction. But in order for the player to pull the object, the pressed button should be the opposite direction of the character's direction. So the only thing that we will need to change is the second condition and the value of the push and pull variable, which means we can just copy all these conditional branches and then paste it down here. And now all we need to change is the second condition and the value of the push and pull variable. So here, the player is facing down. That means the button should, the press button should be up. And then we change the push and pull value into 2, which means the player is pulling the object or going backwards. This one, the player is facing left, which means the button should be right. Change the push and pull value into 2. This one, the player is facing right, which means the pressed button should be left. Change this to 2. And last one, the player is facing up, which means the button should be down. And here we change the push-pull into 2. And that's it. We have finished the part that checks if the player is pushing or pulling the object. Now we will move on to the next part, which is to create the movement for the player and the object. Okay, now we are going to make the movement. Let's go down here. First of all, let's make a comment. Here, a movement. And I think I will make another comment to separate this part from the movement part. We'll make a comment here, look flow. Alright. Okay, so for the movement, we will need two conditional branches, the one for pushing and the one for pulling. So first we will make the one for pushing. We go to event command, conditional branch, and the condition will be the variable push and pull. So if the variable push and pull has the value of equal to 1, this means it's pushing. And the second condition will be if the value of the variable push and pull is equal to 2, which means it's pulling. Okay, for the pushing movement, we will start by creating a movement route for the movable object. So we go to this event command, second page, set movement route, and then the movement route should be directed to this event. So this event in common event refers to the ID of the event that calls this common event. Now here, we will give the movable object the move away from player movement. Now this will give the object the being pushed effect. You will also want to uncheck the wait for completion box and check the skip if cannot move box. The reason why we have to uncheck the wait for completion box is because if this is being checked, then the movable object and the player won't be able to move together, and we don't want that. So it's done for now. Click OK. And now we will need a second move route for the player. So just copy this one move route, paste it down here, and edit it. Now this movement route will be directed to the player, and it will have a different kind of movement. So first we will give it a wait for 1 frame, and then we will give the 1 step forward move. So the player will move 1 step forward. And in here, we will want to check the wait for completion box. And then click OK. And that's basically it, the move for pushing. Now, if you want to add a sound effect in the pushing movement, you cannot just do it by adding it in the movement route or outside here with the event commands. If you do that, you will encounter the same problem that I showed to you at the beginning of the video. This happens because the sound effect does not bind with the object. So even when the object is encountering an impassable tiles or impassable event, the sound effect will keep playing, even when the object is not moving. To make sure that the sound effect plays only when the object is moving, we will need to create a conditional branch. So we go to event command, conditional branch, and then go to the 4th page. Here, we will write a script. So this is the script. This script will check if this event ID is moving or not. We click OK, and then inside this conditional branch, we can play our sound effect. So here, event command, go to the 2nd tab, and in here, we can play our sound effect. Maybe we'll play the earth tree, next the page, and bring down the volume, and that's it. So if the movable object is moving, then the sound effect will play. But if it doesn't move, then it won't play. Also, since the engine needs time to process stuff, you will need to put a wait before this conditional branch. So go to event command, go to the 2nd page, and here, click on await, just give it a 1 frame wait. Now, the pulling movement is the reverse of the pushing movement. So for the pulling movement, we will start by creating a movement route for the player. So we go to event commands, set movement route, and then the movement route will be set for player. Now, we will give the player a 1 step backward movement. And then, just as before, we will uncheck the wait for completion and check the skip if cannot move. So when pulling the object, the player will move first, then the object, right? It's the reverse of pushing. So when pushing, the object moves first, then the player follows. But in the pulling, the player moves first, then the object follows. And then after this, same as before, we create a movement route for the object. So the movement route here will be directed to this event, and then here we will give it a wait for 1 frame, and then we will give it a move toward player movement. So it will give that being pulled effect. And for this one, we will check both wait for completion and skip if cannot move. If you want to add a sound effect in the pulling movement, you will need a different script than the one used in the pushing movement. This is because in the pulling movement, the sound effect will be binded to player, not the movable object. Why? Because in the pulling movement, the one that will collide with the impassable object is the player. And in the pushing movement, the one that will collide with the impassable object is the movable object. So in the pulling movement, instead of checking if the movable object is moving or not, we will need to check if the player is moving or not. To do that, we can just copy this conditional branch, put it after the player move, and now change the script. So this is the script. This will check if the player is moving or not. So if the player is moving, then it will play the sound effect. If the player is not moving, then it won't play the sound effect. And of course, don't forget to put the wait before the conditional branch to give the engine the time to process the sound effect. Alright, we are almost done with the mechanic. Now we just need to do some other finishing touch. So the first one, we need to go under here, and still inside the loop, under this conditional branch, we will want to reset the value of the variable push and pull. So go to event command, control variables, and here we want to set the value of the variable push and pull to 0. So this is to prevent the character to keep pushing or keep pulling if the mechanic is on but the arrow key is not being pressed. And maybe we can add some wait in the event command, 2nd page, wait, maybe just 1 frame. And then we also need to make sure that our character returns to its default behavior after exiting the mechanic. So as you remember here, at the very beginning of the mechanic, we make the character get a direction fix, and we also reduce the speed to 3. We do not want that to stay permanent. So by the end of this loop, under this repeat above, we will want to set a movement route. Just copy this one, paste it here, and then edit it. Make sure that it's for the player. And here, we want to set the direction fix off, and the speed, we will want to change it to normal. Click OK, OK again, and this is to reset the character's behavior if the mechanic is done. And also, don't forget, just to make sure, set the push and pull variable value again to 0. And then click apply, and that's it. Our push and pull mechanic is done and it's ready to be used. Okay, so what we need to do now is to implement this push-pull mechanic into our movable object. Let's click OK and close this, and now let's make the event for our movable object. Just click here 2 times, let's give it a name, push-pull. And then let's give it a sprite. What sprite can we use here? I think the crystal will be a good example. Just a tip, if you make a sprite for an event that will be able to do a push-pull mechanic, I suggest you create the two versions of that sprite. Just like this crystal, it has the non-glowing version and the glowing sprite. We can use the non-glowing sprite as the regular sprite, and the glowing sprite as the sprite that is used in the push-pull mechanic. This will give the player the visual cue that they are already on the push-pull mechanic, which is really good. So I'm going to use this crystal as the sprite, and because the sprite is not complete, I think I will just turn on the direction fix. We click apply, OK, and our movable object is ready to be used. At this point, all you need to do is open the event editor, go to event command, then here go to common event, and call the common event that we have made, the push-pull mechanic common event. Click OK, and that's basically it. Your push-pull mechanic is done. Okay, so we are in the game, and now we are going to test the push-pull mechanic. So first, we are going to interact with it, and we'll try pushing it. And as you can see, it's working. Now we are going to interact with it again and try to pull it. It's working. We'll try from the other direction too. Okay, it's working. Yeah, our push-pull mechanic is pretty much done at this point, but just as I said to you, it will be better if the player has a visual cues on whether or not they are already in the push-pull mechanic when they interact with the object. So now I'm going to show you how to implement that feature. So now we are back in the editor, and to implement such a feature is actually not very hard. So all you need to do is open the event editor for your movable objects event, and here you will have to add a movement route before and after the common event. So before the common event, we'll have to add a movement route for this event. Click 2 times, open the event command, and go to set movement route. In the movement route, make sure that the movement route is directed to this event. And here, since the direction fix is on, and the glowing sprite of this crystal is the left direction sprite of this sprite, then I will have to turn the direction fix off first, and then after that I will make the sprite turn left. And to make it more beautiful and alive, during the push-pull mechanic, I will let the stepping animation of the sprite on, and then after that I'm going to return the direction fix to be on. Okay, after the common event, I want the sprite to return to its regular state. So after the common event, we make another move route, just copy it from this one, and then here, same as before, the direction fix is being set as off again, and this time I'm going to make it turn down, because the regular sprite is the down direction of this sprite. And I will set the stepping animation off, and the direction fix I will return to on. And that's basically it. For whatever happened before and after the common event, you can do whatever you want. You can make some crazy things, it's all up to you. The most important thing is the common event right here. what you add before or after it is totally up to you. So now we are going to try this one. And yeah, now we are going to try this one. Alright, we are back in the game, and this time if we try to interact with our movable object, it will change sprite and the stepping animation will be set to on. And if we stop, it will return to its regular state. So I think this is a very intuitive way of telling the player that they are already in the push and pull mechanic. And I think it just looks really cool. So different from the simple object movement that we talked about in the last video, this mechanic seems to be more complex and robust, so it's hard to customize it. But I think it still has a lot of potential, and one of the things that you can play around with is the speed. The one version that we make now is the one that slows down the player, but what if you create a push-pull object that actually speeds up the player? I think that can be a really interesting mechanic, and I'm going to show you how to make that one now. If you want to make multiple push and pull mechanics, each with their own characteristics, you should make different common events for each of that push and pull mechanics. So let's return to the database and go to the common event. Here we will make a new push and pull mechanic. We'll just copy the previous one and make a new one. This one we'll call push and pull fast. And then here, all we need to do if you want to play around with the speed is change the speed of the player right here. So here, instead of slowing down the player, the push and pull object will actually make it faster. So it will set the player speed into 5, which makes it faster than normal speed. And then we'll click apply. And here we will try to make another push and pull object. We'll just copy this one. We'll change the name into push and pull fast. And then we'll change the sprite, maybe into yellow one. And here, you will also want to change the speed of the object. So maybe change it to also 5. And of course, don't forget to change it to the different version of the push and pull mechanic. Click OK, click apply. And now, we will see how it turns out. So yeah, now we are back in the game, and now we got two versions of the push and pull mechanic. The one is the regular one, and the one is the one that speeds you up. So we'll try with the regular one first. Okay, works well. The good old push and pull mechanic. And this one, it will actually make you faster instead of slowing you down. So if we interact with this and move, as you can see, it's really fast. And of course, there are a lot more ways you can customize it. The more you know about the engine, the more you will be able to customize it. But so far, this is the only idea that I can give to you. By default, this mechanic can already be integrated into so many puzzles, so many other mechanics. So it's already a powerful mechanic by its own. But there's definitely always a room for improvement. So yeah, that's how you can make a push and pull mechanic in RPG Maker. I hope this video helps. Please don't hesitate to ask me if you encounter any problems or any errors when trying to make this mechanic. I will do my best to help. See you in the next video. Goodbye and God bless.